Good morning, everybody. Former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Daniel Kelly is our very special guest today, Thursday, November 17th, 2022. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden. And before we get to our chat with Justice Kelly, I want to give a special shout out and a thank you to some of our recent guests that we've had on, including the senator from Wisconsin's 10th Senate District, Rob Staffschultz, Senator-elect in Wisconsin's 25th Senate District, Romaine Quinn, Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald, Pastor Brian Cole, 30th Assembly District Representative Shannon Zimmerman, 28th Assembly District Representative Gabe Magnifici, and, of course, for our monthly shows, 7th Congressional District Representative Congressman Tom Tiffany, just to name a few. You can watch a recording of those and all of our live shows on our website at DrydenWire.com, on our Facebook page under our videos tab, or just go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/DrydenWire. But today, we welcome first-timer on the show, former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice and current candidate for Wisconsin's highest court, Justice Daniel Kelly. Dan, good morning, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning to you, Ben. It's great to be on your show. Thanks so much for having me.
It's an honor. Like, no kidding. I don't say that to just anybody.
Well, that's very kind of you.
Yeah, no kidding. And I'm so wildly unqualified to even be talking to you right now because I don't know really anything about the Supreme Court. And actually, when I was thinking about this morning, I'm like, is there 7 or 9? I couldn't even answer that. I had to look it up. And I could only name 2 people that are actually on the bench right now. So,
Ben, that's not a bad thing. If the court is doing its job properly, it shouldn't be in the front of people's minds. It really has a pretty limited role. It's just to apply the law that already exists. And so the best news for the court is when it's not in the headlines. So the fact that, folks don't know how many people are on the court, that's just fine. That suggests to me that they're leading good, healthy, and enjoyable lives.
Wow. That's so. Well, thank you for making me, feel less like an idiot than normal by saying that. You're very, very kind. So there's a lot, obviously, to get to regarding you were on the bench, you're Supreme Court Justice, then you're not, and now you're running again, and I think that's probably going to be, I think it's February, that's coming, so there's a whole bunch to get to, but because it's the first time that you've been on, we always want to kind of get to know, Dan, before we get to know Justice Kelly. So let's kind of bullet point version, first page of like a resume, walk us through kind of up to Supreme Court when you first were, I believe, appointed by Scott Walker. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Walk us through this.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm a Santa Barbara boy. That's my hometown. And my family moved when I was young out to Colorado and did most of my grown-up years just outside of Denver. And came to Wisconsin to study at what was then Carroll College in Waukesha County. We didn't have a whole lot of resources growing up. And so Carroll put together a financial aid package for me that really allowed me to be able to go to school. So, but I'd never been here before, didn't know a soul in Wisconsin, came out, brash 18-year-old with all my worldly possessions stashed neatly in the trunk of a 71 Chevelle, and a pretty beat up 71 Chevelle, I might add at that. And came out to Wisconsin.
Dan, if I could interrupt you real quick. So it seems like your screen is frozen there. We just have thankfully it wasn't like a horrible picture of some, there should be a button on your screen that says hang up. And then if you could just do that real quick and then just hit that link to come back in. It should only take a few seconds.
Got it.
We just got Tiffany'd again. And what is it? What is it do you like most about your job and why? Are you asking me, Renee? I'll be happy to answer that. Oh, okay, there we go.
How's that?
Yeah, much better. Yeah. Okay,
I'm
sorry.
The only
Continue
thing worse than seeing my mug in action is seeing it frozen on a screen. So I'm glad we could fix that.
All right, and it doesn't matter if that happens 100 more times. Well, hopefully not 100 more times. It's a real quick fix. Just quick sign out and sign back in. Live shows. What are you going to do? Okay, so continue on. Packed everything up into your car.
Yeah, so I came out. So the college recruiter had told me that there was great fishing in Wisconsin, and I love fishing. So I came out a little bit early before classes start so I could do some fishing. And so the very first day, I find myself at a park next to a lake in Waukesha County, and it was just a splendid weekend. I mean, it was. And the rest of Wisconsin apparently thought so too, because they were all there. I mean, it was packed.
Sure.
But through one thing and another, I ended up sharing a campsite with a young family from Sheboygan Falls, and they were just a delight. They they invited me to their campfire, and they shared their dinner with me. They stayed up into the wee hours of the morning, talking about all those things you talk about when you first meet somebody. And then they took me sailing the next day, and really spent the entire weekend teaching me what it means to be a Wisconsinite. And I came away from that weekend thinking I had just had the most marvelous stroke of luck, because clearly I had just met the most generous and giving people in the entire state of Wisconsin. Well, Ben, you know this. As I spent more time in Wisconsin, I learned that although they were remarkable, they were not unique. I found people like them all over the place, in school, at work, in churches, in other parks around the state. And what I learned was this is what it means to be a Wisconsinite, that they are the people of the open hand and generous heart. And I just fell in love with the people of Wisconsin the very first day, because those were the first people I met in this state. And so that's just continued for the next 40 years. And my wife, in fact, so much so, I found a Wisconsinite to marry, and we've raised our 5 children here, and it's just been a delight.
What? Yeah. So there is, Wisconsin nice. That's a thing. Like, no kidding. It just, and I've been to other parts of the country, and I remember in California, I was talking to someone who employs people, and said, when I told that person I was from Wisconsin, they said, no kidding. Like, we would hire somebody from Wisconsin, or think higher of them during an interview process, because there's also, and this is what they said, Wisconsinites work harder. In terms of every Wisconsin person, or a person I've hired that was from Wisconsin, is nicer and works harder. Like, I didn't realize that, because this is where we're from. Yeah. How bizarre. Okay, so you get married. Yeah. And what are you doing?
So we got married in law school. So so my wife is native to Milwaukee. Her dad was a Milwaukee City police officer most of his life, and so we were dating before law school. So then I picked up and I went to Virginia for law school, and I said, okay, I got to concentrate on studies. So I just got to be really focused. Yeah. So I go down there, and and at the end of the first year of law school, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to do this by myself. So we got married after my first year of law school. She came out to Virginia with me then, and that was a delight. The funny thing is, Ben, I was actually a little worried about being a newlywed in law school, because I was concerned about what it might do to grades.
Yeah, so, no kidding.
Right? So you're newlywed, you're distracted by things, and what I discovered, I did well in the first year of law school, but oddly enough, my grades went even higher after I got married. So my wife has been a blessing to me in so many different ways, not the least of which was that.
Yeah, it's interesting how they just make us better.
Just everything.
Everything. Yeah, I know. I know. It's really bizarre.
Yeah. So almost like it was made to be that way. So
what?
So then, I graduate. I clerk in DC.
I'm taking a screenshot of that one. That one's going to go into a meme. Hold on.
Last one. Hang on a second. Let me hang up here.
Okay. Oh, shoot. I didn't get to it in time. Doggone it. Oh. Hey, here we go. There we go.
All right. There we are live again.
Yeah.
Right. So I clerked for Ralph Adam Fine on the Wisconsin Court of Appeals, and that was just it was just a joy. He's a great man, great mentor.
What does clerking mean? I've heard that before, but I don't know what that means.
So this is one of the it's a prized position coming out of law school. You get to work closely with a judge or a justice, depending on what court you're on, and you assist the judge with his duties. And what that entails differs depending on who the judge is. But Ralph Allen Fine was just a born teacher and mentor. And so we would talk about the cases. I'd be reading the briefs. I'd be writing him memos. I'd be doing research for him. And then on per curiam decisions that were assigned to him, I would do a draft of the opinion for his review. And you get an opportunity to be deeply involved in the work of a court. And it's kind of kind of a finishing school of sorts. After law school that's entirely academic, you go to a clerkship and you start seeing in real life how this works. And so I clerked for him for a year, and then I clerked for a special master on the Court of Federal Claims in D.C. for a year, and then served as a staff attorney on that court for 3 years after that. And so had a fascinating time in Washington, D.C. My wife and I knew that we were only going to be there for a short period of time, and so we took almost every weekend and went around to see historical sites, take advantage of the museums and all that, because it so often happens when there are interesting attractions that are basically in your backyard. You're like, yeah, I'll get to it. And then you never do.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure, because we knew we were just there for a short time, we wanted to make sure to take advantage of that as much as we could. So we kind of became tour guides for all of our family and friends who would come out to visit us. And I had my route around DC that I would take them on, and all the attractions we'd point out. And it was just a fascinating time. But then it was time to come back to Wisconsin and start private practice. And that's what I did for most of my career. The vast majority of that was as a commercial litigator in one of the state's oldest and most respected law firms, a firm of over 200 attorneys. I became a partner in the litigation department, and I just had a delightful time practicing law.
By the way, I've never heard anybody say, I've had a delightful time practicing law. Like I've never, I'm not saying that people don't, I've just never heard it put that way before.
Yeah, delightful time. This is all about dreams and the fulfillment of dreams. So I had wanted to be a lawyer since I was in 7th grade. And it was, my parents brought me up to have a well-developed sense of justice. And so you look out on the world and you see things that oftentimes are not as they ought to be. And the law struck me as an area where you could work to remedy some of that, right? When people don't follow the law, the court system is there to make sure that they do.
So was this a 7th grade thing? Like you got beat up or something? And you're like, I'm going to sue you, but I don't know how. But I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, that's it wasn't that.
Oh, okay.
Although that would have made a much better story.
That would have been a good story.
I'm afraid mine is just the story of a nerd, settling early on what he wanted to do. So, I mean, I've been a bookworm my entire life. I love reading.
Hey, nerds and geeks rule the world, man. Love them.
Totally. And you don't know that when you're a kid, right? It's just you're a nerd, and you see all the popular people around, and you're like, kind of like to be one of them.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Here I am. So, but yeah, the funny thing is when you grow up, you find out that the people who were cloistered, perhaps, who hit the books, they're the ones actually moving and shaking and make sure the world works the way it's supposed to.
Yep.
So, and I guess, that was the big thing. I wanted to make sure that in whatever little way that I could, that I'd make sure that the world worked the way that it should. And, we have laws for a reason. It is so that is to protect our liberties, is to protect Our property is to protect our ability to live together in the hopes of peace and prosperity,
Mm.
and making sure that the laws are followed is just a foundational piece of that. And I wanted to be a part of that.
Mm.
So that kind of that drew me to the law, and that's one of the reasons it was a delight to me. So going to court and making sure that the law was followed in
Mm.
all the cases that I handled was just deeply satisfying to me.
So then, how did that lead to your being in the Supreme Court? I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds
through
like this is like the bulk of your career was doing
right.
what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so going to the court was oddly a bit of happenstance. So I'd actually wanted a good friend of mine to get to the Supreme Court, and he's on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals now. But when an opening happened on the Supreme Court, he decided not to pursue it, and several of my 3 a.m. friends, the people that you rely on for solid, straight advice, the kind of folks you put your life in their hands, they encouraged me to apply for appointment to the Supreme Court. And so
Appointment,
after,
right? Yeah. So this wasn't running for it. I mean, yes, but not really. I mean, you know what
yeah,
I mean?
kind of not really. Yeah. So
Right. So this wasn't an election. This was. So what? Somebody was retiring, right?
that's right. So Justice David Prosser, just an outstanding jurist, gave many, many years of his life to the courts and did an outstanding job. He was retiring,
Okay. And
and
there's
so
it's a 10-year term, I
yeah,
believe, and so he was what 5, 6, 7 years in to his term.
yeah, I think it was 4 or 5 years in, something
Okay.
like
And
that.
so then when he announced his retirement, it's not another election. I think, by the way, county judges, I think that's a little different. Right? I think they have to
Yes,
run the next
so
year. But for Supreme Court, you
right,
get appointed, and that's by the governor, and then you
yep,
fill the rest of that term, of that 10-year term.
almost. So
Oh,
the way it works for the Supreme Court, it's a little bit odd. Is you stand for election in the next spring general election, in which no other member of the court is on the ballot. So I was appointed
weird.
in 2016 because there can only ever be one justice at a time on a ballot.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I was appointed in 16. There were already elections scheduled for 17, 18, and 19. So the
Okay.
first available year was 20. So that's when I ran.
Interesting. And now,
Yeah.
obviously, this is different, and we'll get into that kind of the juxtaposition between "quote unquote" running in 2020 versus now. You're going to be on a ballot, kind of running.
Right.
So, so that appointment process first. So before the 2020 election, you're appointed. What does that process like?
It was rigorous. And I have to say, oddly enough, you might chuckle at this. It was really enjoyable. So the way it works
That sounds like
is
you already. Yeah, it was a very delightful experience.
no, well, I love the academic aspect of the law, just the intellectual pursuit that it is. That just I enjoy that immensely. So the governor had a judicial selection advisory council that he put together, and so if you're interested in appointment, you'd fill out an extensive application, and then you would be grilled many times based on your career, the work that you've done, and then concentrating really closely on your judicial philosophy. Because what they were looking for is a particular kind of jurist. They wanted to make sure that the person they appointed understood that the court is for applying the law, not for making it. And so, that's a simple way of putting it. But over a long period of time, we've developed the understanding here in Wisconsin and across the United States that you don't legislate from the bench, right? I mean, that is kind of the catchphrase that we use to identify between judicial activists on the one hand and judicial conservatives on the other. And let me hasten to add, when we talk about judicial conservatism, that has nothing to do with politics. The conservative part of that label refers to conserving the proper role and function of the courts as described by the Constitution. So, and that is to apply the law, not make it up as you go along. And so that long, rigorous project of interviewing potential appointees was to ensure that the person had a deep and thorough understanding of the constitutional parameters of the work of the court. And so it oftentimes turned into just lengthy discussions about constitutional principles, where they came from, the foundation and the framing of our Constitution, the Federalist Papers and what the different authors said about the role of the court, how that's developed over time, where it's gone off the rails, and what it takes to get the courts back on the proper footing. And so it was a wonderful intellectual journey through that appointment process. And then at the end, Governor Walker was kind enough to offer the appointment to me.
Do you know how many? Well, maybe not like how many applied, but there must have been a short list at some point.
Yeah.
Do you know? And obviously you were on that short list. Are we talking 4, 10, 20?
Yeah. So there were. So the short list. So the way it goes is that there are a number of interviews. The final interviews with the governor. So the committee will forward, one or more names to the governor for his consideration. So in my case, it was 3 names, and it was, when I found out that I advanced to the final round, I was delighted because the other 2, and I won't mention their name, but the other 2 on the list were sitting Court of Appeals judges who I respected. And I looked at the list and I thought, one of these things does not look like the other. And I figured, well, it's an honor to
have made it this far. Yep.
Yeah. And that's great. I'm really pleased to be in the company of 2 respected jurists. And I will go away with my head held high. And this was a great journey. And then, as it turns out, the governor called, and after we'd done the interview, and a few weeks later, he called and said, "Well, now, Dan, if you're still interested, I'd like to appoint you to the court." I'm like, well, I don't know, sure, why not? But I mean, I was bowled over by that. Sure. It was such an honor to have that.
So that was in 2016?
That's right.
2016. So then that goes. So what was your kind of your experience like?
Yeah. So
in this, was it everything that you thought it was going to be? As in, I had a pretty good understanding of what this is going to be, or is it, holy cow, that was wildly different than I thought? I thought I knew everything about it, but I clearly did not.
Yeah, there were some things that I did not expect. Most of it was exceeded my expectations as far as the actual doing the actual work of the court. Now, it was kind of funny. After I was kind of far along in the appointment process, one of my friends came to me and said, "Now, Dan, are you sure you want to do this? Because if you get appointed, this is what your life is going to look like. You're going to be in chambers every day." By yourself, and all you're going to be doing is reading about the law and writing about the law. And I said, yeah, and?
Yes, please. Can I do it on weekends too?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I thought, that sounds like heaven to me. Come on, of course. So, and indeed, that's largely what it turned out to be. I mean, it was just, and it was, evenings and weekends, doing the work of the court at that level. It really takes an immense commitment.
Yeah, you don't want to screw that stuff up.
You really don't.
That's kind of a big one.
Mean, it's true. I mean, funny thing, the first majority opinion I was writing for the court, I was standing in chambers, and across the back wall were just a wall full of beautiful bookcases filled with Wisconsin reports, all the books containing all the prior opinions of the Supreme Court and the published opinions of the Court of Appeals. And I looked at the computer screen at the opinion I was working on, I glanced at all the volumes in the bookcases against the wall, and I thought, oh my goodness, when I get done, this opinion is going to go in a book, and it's going to go on the wall, and it's going to be there forever. And if that does not bring the gravity and the immensity of the responsibility down your shoulders, nothing will. And so it is a consequential thing to do, and that's part of the joy of it. Actually, is knowing that you are having a real impact in ensuring that the laws the people of Wisconsin have decided to enact are followed in every single case.
And it's a privilege to do it, but knowing that you're just a part, like the Supreme Court's going to be here. It was here way before you. It'll be here way after you. You're just there's a word I'm thinking of, and I can't think of it right now.
A very, very small piece. Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's not what I was thinking of. Out of curiosity, does everyone, for the most part, when you do see each other, I don't know how often you saw your peers, most part get along? I mean, obviously there's very strong opinions and different personalities, etc.
Yeah.
But is it mostly, is it just like a professional, respectful, but like, ugh, you see him come down the hall like in high school, you just look away or go down another hall or something? Or is it like, no, that's fine. Like we'll have lunch together and stuff. It's fine.
Yeah. My experience was that it was very professional and friendly. So, I know that was not the experience for everyone in the past, but it was when I arrived there, that's what I found. And so, I disagree. I had one delightful encounter indeed with a member of the court with whom I would disagree frequently. She came down to my chambers, and it was actually the first one to greet me when I arrived at the Supreme Court. And she says, "Now, Dan, we're going to disagree a lot, but if you don't twist my arm for a vote, we'll get along just fine." And I said, well, I think we are probably going to disagree a lot, but I'm not going to twist your arm.
Okay.
And I think we will get along just fine. And we did. And this was a very, very intelligent jurist. And I respected her intellect a great deal. And so, we had some of the most interesting conversations because she'd been at it for a very long time. And although we rarely agreed, we tested each other in the way that we looked at the law. And the disagreements largely came because of the starting point from which we applied the law. So I started with the idea that the law was the end all and be all, and that we follow it without regard to whether we like the results that it produces, whether it's the kind of law that we would pass if we were in the legislature or not. That the role of the court was limited, it was humble, and it was there just to apply.
I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you. And this sounds like a leading thing. I honestly just thought that's how it was.
Yeah,
right?
And that's, and I'm delighted to hear you say that because that is the expectation I think that the people of Wisconsin have. I mean, they elect their legislators for a reason. So that they're the ones to make the law. And they have a legitimate expectation that when those laws go to the court to resolve cases, that the court is not going to take liberties with that law, is not going to be judging the wisdom or the efficacy of the law, but is going to faithfully apply it.
Yeah, I mean, we have every Tuesday, I have Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald, and we do a show called Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy. And we've talked about that a lot, kind of the role of, being law enforcement. And, as a sheriff, he is an elected, it's an elected position. And it's, it's our job to enforce the law, right? Protect, serve, but we enforce the law. We don't make the law if you don't like it. So if there's a story about, pot, that always gets people riled up, right? It's fantastic. Right. And it's not like they're going around and just busting somebody for like a little doobie or something. But, when there's a barn full of pot and there's, and there's one story that had monkeys in it and everything, it was just this crazy story. And, everyone says, well, why don't you focus on meth and fentanyl and all the other ones? Like, well, we're doing that too, but, this is the law. My opinion, if marijuana should be legalized or not, is irrelevant. If that's your opinion, call your legislator. But my job in law enforcement is to do my job, is to uphold the law. So I've always just kind of assumed that's what, judges do. And certainly Supreme Court, is no different. Just you have one job to do.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Well, and that, I would that that were true. So right now the court is balanced
Weird.
4-3 or so in favor of those who understand that that's what their job is, just apply the law. But it's 4-3.
What's the other side then? I
So
mean,
the other side looks at the law and says, and I think to give the most generous uh, reading of what they understand of themselves is this: the law is a starting place, and then we figure out, in this circumstance, is that accomplishing, what we consider personally to be fundamental justice, or do we think that there's a better way that this should work? And so they allow their personal political beliefs to interfere with the job of the court, and that steers them away from a straightforward, rigorous reading of the law. And so they, you empty some words of meaning and fill it with a different meaning. You downplay one provision of the law, you emphasize another, and eventually, lawyers are generally a clever lot, and they work with the language every day. And if you are intent on arriving at a particular conclusion, then
you're
you
gonna.
can kind of manipulate the law to get you there. And I just think that's a breach of trust with the people of Wisconsin.
Yeah, I kind of do
And
too.
it's a breach of trust with the Constitution and the oath of office.
Yeah, that seems weird. No, so you were there 2016 to 2020.
Yep.
What month did you leave? Or we'll get to that in a second about the election.
Yep.
What month? How long did you serve in 2020?
Yeah, until the end of July.
End of July. So that was COVID time, wasn't it? Safer at home and all that. You were on the.
Sure
So I didn't know that. Okay, so yeah, that was there was a safer at home, and then there was what? There's a whole bunch of extended orders.
Yeah.
Man, what was that one case that I can't remember the name of that case. Whatever you guys refer to it as, but it was everyone saying the illegal extensions and all that stuff, and I think it was like mask mandating or all this stuff that was coming up, and I don't want to get into that because whatever people believe, that's fine, whatever. But just that went to the court, and I think so. If you were on that court, I thought that was like a really close vote, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So the safer at home order was addressed in the Palm case.
Oh, that's what it was.
And yeah, and the issue there, like I looked at the order. I'm like, well, this may or may not be a good idea, a wise idea. But the question before the court was, did the executive branch have the authority to issue that order?
Right.
And so Justice Rogensack wrote the opinion for the court, and she says, well, her explanation was, well, you didn't go through the rulemaking process, and therefore this was not a validly promulgated rule, and therefore it is unlawful. And that's
that would be
true.
through the legislature, right? That's what that meant?
Well, yeah. Well, the
no?
rulemaking process actually is an executive process.
Okay.
And here's where, and so she was correct that it did not go through the rulemaking process, but there was a more fundamental problem with it. And that was one that both Justice Rebecca Bradley and I addressed. We each wrote opinions, and we addressed the constitutional question, which is, does the executive branch of government have the authority to legislate? And the answer to that, just in case anyone's wondering, is no. When we put together our Constitution way back in 1848, the people of Wisconsin said we want our legislature and no other branch to legislate, not the executive branch and not the courts. And so we looked at the order and we said, well, this is a piece of attempted legislation. It sets out new standards by which the people of Wisconsin had to comply, and they were enforceable by criminal law. And that's something that only the legislature can do. The people of Wisconsin wisely entrusted that to the legislative branch, not to the executive. And so that's what Rebecca Bradley and I both wrote, was that even if the executive branch had gone through the rulemaking process, it still would have been an unlawful order because they had to steal the legislature's authority to
Mm.
do it. So we struck that down, and you, as you mentioned, it was a very close vote. It was 4-3. And so if I had not been on the court at that time, uh, if there had been a judicial activist on the
Sure, sure.
court at that time, then it would have gone the other direction. And all you need to do to know why is look at the dissents. And the dissents were not an analysis of constitutional authority. The dissents were, well, it's COVID, and it's a good idea to do this. Like I said, maybe it was a good idea, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, but
But
that's not your
good
guys'
ideas,
job, I don't think.
yeah, that's not what makes it constitutional. Just, not every good idea is constitutional.
That
You
has to be
have
tough. And did
follow.
you, for first of all, for those three that had their views, okay, whatever. Uh, they must struggle with this, and I wonder if you struggle with this. I just, it's inevitable. It has to come up. That separation of my view, my opinion.
Yeah,
I know I run into that all the time because I'm a man of faith, and my faith isn't somebody else's faith. So I'm not going to judge them, etc. But
right.
so I have to put away my personal feelings or my belief system, and do my job and whatever. We all expect, I think, everybody at that level where you were that should be easy for you, right? Because, I mean, holy cow, that should be easy, but you're still human.
Yes.
Did you find it challenging sometime going, but nope, Dan, don't.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course. I mean, we all, every justice is a person in whole. We bring our whole person to the court. The trick is to set aside our personal preferences as we decide the law. Now, the way to do that, and it has to be a conscious decision, and it has to be a conscious decision every single day. Every time you pick up a new case, you have to remind yourself, now this is about the law, it's not about me. And so if you really want to do this, if you want to do the job properly, I think there's really only one way of doing it. You first have to acknowledge that you have beliefs and preferences and dislikes and all of that. You've got to acknowledge them. You've got to make sure that you name it, and then you set it aside. And so when the way I did this, and I think really it's really the only effective way of doing it. When I would write an opinion, I'd start with the law that's applicable to that case, and then I would use rigorous logic in moving from the premises, the law, down to the conclusion. And then when you get done, you should be able to look back and see an unbroken chain of logic between the law and the conclusion. And if you see no breaks in the chain of logic, then you can be confident that the conclusion has been demanded by the law. But if there's any breaks in the logic, that's where personal preferences start to interfere, seep into the process. And so, as this is one of the things that I valued about my colleagues on the court, and perhaps even more so those who disagreed with me on a jurisprudential level, because we would circulate our opinions to the rest of the court, and they would have an opportunity to pick it apart and identify where they believed we were not correct, and so on. And so, after I got done with that rigorous logical project, I'd send that around to the rest of the court, and then wait to see what they said. And I was confident that there were folks there who would have a vested interest in trying to find a logical error. And sometimes they did, and I'd have to rethink what we're doing. And then you either change or you demonstrate that there was not actually an error in logic. And then eventually you get to a point where I can't find any problems in the logic. No one else has been effectively able to identify any problems in the logic. And then that's the opinion.
I didn't realize that much went into it.
Yeah. Oh, it's immense. I mean, if you really care about the work of the court, it is the amount of time that it takes and attention and effort is immense. So I would do probably 10 to 12 hours a day. And once we got into the opinion writing part of the year, probably around starting in October and then going through the end of June, it would be 6 to maybe 6.5 days a week, every week, until the end of June.
My goodness. So this may have actually answered a question. So I went this morning to Wikipedia, right? Because that's the greatest source ever. But I just
always a great place to go.
Yeah, to find out. And I have a screen graphic here, just a screenshot of that about the election. And I wonder if that ties in, because I had a question about this, but now I have a second question. So you then ran for election for 2020 or in 2020, right?
Yep.
February and whatever.
Yep.
So now I'm wondering, did that play a role? Your decision on that Palm case, did that play a role in it? But this is what it was. This is just a screenshot from their election results. I assume they're accurate, but you never know. So I have a question, and that is, since it's nonpartisan, there isn't a Republican or Democrat. However, we know conservative and liberals. But the partisan, February 18th, 2020, there's you, Daniel Kelly. You have 50% of the vote. Now there's Jill, and then there's an Ed. And I'm just going to assume both of those would be considered or are liberal. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fair.
So if you added both of those up, let's say everyone that, like you wouldn't have gotten any of their votes, because obviously this just narrows it down to the top two. So if there was like 5, it doesn't matter. Just throw the top 2. But if you add up Jill and Ed's there, it still comes like 39%. Or I'm sorry, 49%.
49, yeah.
So if in that scenario, you would have won. So I'm like, okay, like if I was looking at this in 2020 and this all happened and someone asked me, do you think Dan Kelly was going to win the general election in April? I would say, well, he's the incumbent, so that's good in terms of re-election. That usually works pretty well. And then you look at those numbers and yeah, kind of I would have to, if I was a bet man, I'd put money on that. But then you look at the general election in April and you lose by like 10.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand that.
So that's a really helpful juxtaposition of the primary and the general election, and it's a great description of why it turned out that way. Because in the general election, the difference was that there was a presidential primary on the same day, and so in the state of Wisconsin, you might recall that in 2020 there was a Democratic presidential primary and no Republican presidential primary. And that skewed the turnout dramatically. So, anywhere between, so generally speaking, in spring elections, maybe 25 to 35% of the fall turnout will come out in spring. So it's it's a much reduced turnout. Now, the only time that changes is when there is a presidential primary that spring.
And
then that's when the turnout just goes through the roof for the party that has the primary.
Okay.
And so, the Democrats were banking on my opponent. The Democratic Party of Wisconsin contributed almost $1 million directly to her. And I come to find out that $1 million came from out of state. But they were all in on her. So Democratic presidential primary, Democratic Party pouring into her campaign. She identified as a social justice warrior. And so when people came out in large numbers on the left, that was the result.
And and this time is going, you know what, hold on a second. So we're almost against our time here, but can you stick around for another, 10 minutes or so?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. You're starting to, it seems to be a little lag or something. I don't know if it'll help or not. Would you want to hit that hang up button and sign back in and maybe that will help?
I'll do it.
All right. Sweet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man, I'm learning so much. 1,500 and 705,000. All right, there we are.
All right.
Oh, we're back in business. Okay, so you lose this election, and a contributing factor, we'll say, I don't know if anyone would be, unless you would want to actually say that I lost because of the election, or the presidential election, but that's certainly, at the very least, you could say it was a contributing factor. To what degree you could, I suppose anyone could make that argument, but That seems to make sense, especially even when we just look at that the primaries there.
Yeah.
That just it kind of all adds up.
Yeah, and I think I think the tale is told in the numbers that we were able to do. So I got 692,000 votes, and if you set aside the years in which there was a presidential primary on the same day, there's only one justice in the history of the state who got more votes than I did in 2020, and so I think that in any other year, this would have been a walkaway win. It wouldn't even have been close.
And considering the fact, so that would be like a top of the ticket type thing, right? So
Yep.
yeah, the presidential things. So it's kind of like the governor and the attorney general. If the governor is a Democrat, the attorney general is probably going to be a Democrat too, like Hall and Evers. And if Michaels won, it more likely would have been that Eric Toney would have won, right? They kind of go hand in hand there.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it, again, top of the ticket stuff, and not a lot of people pay attention to the Attorney General's race. As we talked about at the very beginning of the show, I could name 2 Supreme Court justices before we started the show out of the 7. And I wasn't even sure if there was 7 or 9. Yeah. So that means that they're going on and they're seeing, Biden or what all the Democrats top of the ticket. You're going to be up there too, Supreme Court. But it's, who are these people? So you're probably just going to vote for, I'm assuming. Wait, but if you're not Democrat, wait a minute, hold on. So it's
so it's nonpartisan.
Yeah, so it's not on the same day.
It is the same day. Yeah. So here's the thing. So in Wisconsin, we have our nonpartisan elections in spring and our partisan elections in fall.
Yeah.
And then the only time that we decide to mess that up is in presidential primaries. And there is no race that is more partisan than a presidential primary.
Yeah.
And the legislature decided to drop that right on my general election day.
Outstanding.
An election that's supposed to be entirely nonpartisan.
Right.
And they match it up with the most partisan possible election. Yeah. So anyway, so that was it's unfortunate, and obviously I'd prefer that not be the case, because people look at all other considerations aside, of partisan politics. People look at the court differently. They know what they want. They want people who will just apply the law. And but there is a different dynamic when there is a presidential primary there, and one of the political parties has contributed just an enormous sum of money to one of the candidates. And when that candidate is publicly identifying politically with that party, then the partisanship just swamps every other consideration. And so I think that's just terribly unfortunate. Mm-hmm. And so, I've sometimes been asked what I intend to do differently this year than in 2020 to make sure this is going to be a more successful outing. And I said, well, I promise not to run in a year in which there will be a presidential primary. And I think that's
and that kind of brings us up to where we are now, and that is you are running. So there's another. Is somebody retiring, or is this a term that's up?
Yeah. So Justice Pat Rogensack is retiring. Her term is up this next year. So she's not running for re-election. And so I'm running to fill that seat. Oh,
so I printed out, again, from Wikipedia. It was just a whole bunch of like their names and whatever.
There you go.
I didn't realize. So Rogensack said, Pat, her full name is Patience. What?
Yes.
That's an awesome name.
It's an excellent name. And it's a fitting name too. So Pat was the Chief Justice for the entire time that I was on the court. And I think she just did a marvelous job as chief.
Yeah, she assumed office August 1st, 2003, elected in political leaning conservative. Oh, I don't know who I'm talking to. Set it back on. Yeah, it looks like you hit your bandwidth limit for your house for the month.
No, is that how that works? I'm going to have to revisit that.
Yeah, so let's get right to where we are right now to wrap this up, and that is that you're running again. Rogensack is retiring, right?
Yes.
So that position, that seat is now open. You are running as a conservative right? That's would be okay.
As,
Is there anyone else?
as a judicial conservative, which of course is different from a
Regular
political
sure,
conservative or
sure,
political liberal.
sure. And boy, that's a whole other show we should do.
Yeah.
Is there anyone running against you that you know of, or has announced that they're going to be?
Yeah, so there are two people who have announced. One is a Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge. The other is a Dane County Circuit Court judge. And right now, they are trying to figure out which one of them will be the most activist if they were to get to the court. And so I'm kind of enjoying. I'm popping some popcorn and taking notes and just watching them as they figure that out.
Yeah. No other judicial conservative that has announced?
Not at this point.
Sure.
There's a possibility someone else might get in, but not at this point.
And so then this election will be, because that's interesting. Most people, the election just got finished, like the big election.
Yes.
Right now. So most people were talking, oh, that's so nice. We don't have to deal with this stuff for like another 2 years. No, hold on a second. In 3 months, there's another election, and it's obviously significant. There's only 7 Supreme Court justices. It's a pretty big gig. It's a pretty important job, man. And when we see these votes of 4-3 all the time, or not all the time, we do see those. That one is huge. So that's going to be in, what is it, February?
February 21 is the primary. So it's a jungle primary. So because this is a nonpartisan office, everyone who's running participates in the same primary. And then the top 2 vote getters go on.
Yeah, so it could be like 8 people or 10. It doesn't matter. Right now, we think 3, right?
Yeah.
It could be more. And then we just narrow it down to the top 2. Doesn't matter about anything. Just pick your, top 2. And then you're going to have an election, April again?
April 4th.
April 4th. Yeah. And, and so nobody else is going to be on these ballots. Or they could county stuff, right?
Yeah, we'll be, the Supreme Court will be top of ticket.
I'll say top of the ticket.
There'll also be, I know that I haven't looked to see how many, but there'll be at least 1 Court of Appeals, probably more, that will be on the ballot. There'll be circuit court races on the ballot, county supervisors, mayor elections, school boards.
Yeah, but this is like the general, the top of the ticket where it's a governor, right? In the partisan races, a governor and a president's going to be at the top. You are basically the Supreme Court, race, I guess, or you're like the governor or the president. It's the top of the ticket stuff, and everything else comes after us. But that's how I'm assuming they do it that way because they think it's that important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's they list the constitutional law officers first, and that's how that gets.
I'll just say important. That's how I'll look at it. The most important.
So, but I want to back up to what you said about just elections just getting over. I mean, if there was any justice in the world, we would get a reprieve from electoral matters for at least 6 months.
Yeah, come on.
The world is as it is.
And my goodness. Where can people go to find out more about you? You have a website, I think, right?
We do. It's justicedanielkelly.com.
Nice.
And you can find out some about us there. And then we are on Twitter, and that's Justice Dan Kelly. Apparently, my full name takes too much room. Justice Dan.
Yeah, Elon Musk doesn't like full names, I don't think. No.
Yeah. So, and that's fine. My friends call me Dan anyway, so I think that works out just fine. And then I think we're Justice Daniel Kelly on Facebook.
All right. Well, best of luck to you in February. Is there anything that you wanted to share or add that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
The only thing I would say, Ben, is just thank you so much for having me on your show. This has been an absolute delight. Thank you to your listeners. And I'm looking forward to get back up north. One of the enjoyable parts about a campaign is that we travel the whole state. And turns out this is a big state.
Come to find out.
And one of my favorite areas is northern Wisconsin. So we live in Waukesha County, but we've moved out to the western edge. We're right on the edge of the Kettle Moraine State Forest, and the more that we can get ensconced in nature, the better. And so I love going up north for that reason. And so I'm
next time you come, let me know when you come to north of Wisconsin, and we'll go out for a steak.
Excellent. My treat. It'll be great fun. Ben, thank you so much.
Thanks,
It's been very enjoyable.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much. Special thank you to our guest today, former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice and current candidate for Wisconsin's highest court, of course, Justice Daniel Kelly. Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald and I will be back next week for our latest episode of Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy, which of course airs on Tuesdays, 8:30 right here on our Facebook page. So until then, for DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden saying thank you for watching, and as always, have a blessed day.